Welcome everyone to NSS Connections, a series of virtual programs for sculptors and other NSS members. My name is Gwen Peer and I'm here in Midtown Manhattan in the NSS offices. Our program today is titled Working Beyond Yourself with NSS fellow Eugene Daub. I suspect you are all familiar with Eugene's work. He really needs no introduction, so I'll keep this one very brief. Eugene is an American contemporary sculptor living and working in Southern California. He is best known for his portraits and monumental figurative sculptures, of which he has created over 40, located in 3 of the nation's state capitals, the National Statuary Hall in the United States Capitol building, and in public and permanent collections throughout this country and Europe. In addition to monumental works, he is a recognized medallic artist, a recipient of the Saltus Award from the American Numismatic Society, a recipient of the National Sculpture Society's Medal of Honor, and the NSS Henry Herring Art and Architecture Award. I urge you to visit his website. There's a lot of information, but right now we want to hear from the man himself. I do need to mention that over 100 friends and members have RSVP'd for this event, so please remain muted and enter any questions in the chat room. Thank you. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Eugene.
There's really no one way, I think, to get this beyond yourself thing going because it's a little different for everyone. And for me, it had to do with using a different process, using a different material, and that sometimes allowed me to break through to a place that I couldn't get otherwise. And just to go back to a period for me where I made some of my breakthroughs, I think, was in the summer of 1988. I became an artist in residence at Alfred University, and I had hit the wall. I think the sculpture that I was making was adequate. It was competent, but it just wasn't getting me to the place I wanted to be, and it wasn't reflecting all the magical work that I had seen that had inspired me over the years to become a sculptor. So I set myself into a position, giving myself a year to just experiment with ceramic clay, which is, for those of you who work with it, know that it's so tremendously different than oil clay. And I was using, as you do with oil clay, you need an armature, you need, it gives you just what you put into it. It doesn't really give you much else, where ceramic clay, for me, denied that. I had to come up with a new way to build things with slabs to figure out how to make the clay support itself. And that all had to do with timing and shrinking and warping and a lot of other things that make wet clay so interesting to work with. This was an early piece that I did. I called it Mully Pitcher. And in those days, again, I was just working with slabs, which forced me not to rely on my surface modeling skills, which seemed to just limit me so tremendously. My early influences were, and I like to share these with you because they're not what I would have thought, even for myself, being a figurative sculptor would have appealed to me. I mean, of course, I loved Rodin and Carpeaux and all those great people. But I mean, I'd looked at hundreds of torsos, but no torso fascinated me the way Julio Gonzalez did a torso. And I'm not sure if it was because of his modus operandi, whether it was what he left undone, whether it was in the process of hammering and leaving parts unfinished, but there was just something magical about it that he had gotten to, he had reached. And even in his other work, being a very very good draftsman, he was able to define line and volume and all the things that a draftsman would do, but so cleverly in a very resistant material. And I also think this little relief on the right inspired me to relief because it was so fresh and unexpected. Another one of my influences was Claes Oldenburg, who not all of his work, I mean, he seemed to make some breakthroughs in his approach, which had a lot to do with scale. And I think that was also an important thing for me. I really couldn't do anything interesting at life size. I could, if I work smaller than life size, I could kind of come up with some things, or if I worked over life size, but same size didn't work. And I think Claes Oldenburg had a similar thing. And again, a brilliant draftsman, and yet able to access his humor. And this piece isn't really even over life size. It's just a brilliant and humorous new way to render a piece of sculpture that at that point had never been done before, and was just thoroughly fascinating to me. Matisse was, for all his brilliance as a painter and a printmaker, it was his cutouts and his paperwork like this of just using clippings and found shapes to create a figure, and then just blocking in a profile was so delightful to me. This sculptor needs no introduction. Giacomo Manzu was certainly never one to deny his facility. In fact, he seemed to use it and embrace it to the point where that's what enabled him to, I think, break through and go beyond himself, was this absolute acceptance of it, of facility. William King was always magical to me, and the elegant ways he would put things together, and the distortions and the simplicity, the economy, whether it was in a large public piece like this one or in some of his funny little paper sculptures. And to the right there is one of his early pieces before he got into this elongation thing, which he did so well and stuck to for a long time. He did a series of these vinyl pieces, which were just delightful. Andy Warhol, well, I relate to Andy in some ways because we both started out in the same city in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we both were commercial artists. And he was a little farther ahead of me in terms of years, but at the time I became aware of him, even then, he really wasn't known for his delightful drawings. And I mean, he was absolutely a consummate draftsman and illustrator. But what people remember Andy Warhol for was really his prints, his portrait prints, among other things, of course, the soup cans and the Brillo and all that sort of thing. But the prints were an ongoing subject for him. And by denying his amazing skills as a draftsman, he would just use his Polaroid camera and drop the grays out, and then use some swatches of color and cutouts, and then finally punctuate it lightly with a few lines. And they're totally beyond what he did as a draftsman. Stephen de Stabler was one of my first influences because when in the late summer of '89, I think, when I went to Alfred, became aware of him. And he was really not a figure sculptor, but he became a sort of a figure sculptor because I think he loved the figure, and he found out ways that he could create it through not anatomical excellence, but through a lot of old castings that he had laying around in his backyard. He began to make molds and do press molds and layer and stack, and he really made an amazing breakthrough that set his career on fire. Later, he began to drift away from that and moved into bronze work, to the delight of his galleries, because now they were able to sell multiples. But also, it worked for him because for the first time he was able to defy gravity. And I remember during the 90s, we both worked or sent work to the same foundry in Berkeley, and Artworks Foundry. And I remember he was, in those days, he was doing molds from his original ceramic, and then making waxes, and then piecing them together to achieve a whole series of angels like this. This is the work of Tom Van Sant, who we featured in our sculpture review. I believe it was in the relief issue a couple of years ago. And Tom Van Sant had a huge impact on me because of his innovation and the way he reinvented relief. Like, I don't think anybody that I've ever seen, even going back to the Egyptians. And he was able to achieve this by carving his originals in styrofoam in reverse. And so then he would take this original reverse foam to the job site and place it within the form of the building that they were building, and they would backfill it with concrete. And Tom was not originally a relief artist. He started out as an illustrator. In fact, he illustrated all the illustrations for Spartacus, the movie Spartacus, and a book, Spartacus, and then turned to foundry work for a while. And then, as he tells me, he caught his pants on fire and decided that that wasn't for him anymore either. And he began to venture into relief, and went on to create over 40 of these pieces in the southern part of the state of California, and I think mainly in Orange County. Getting back to ceramic and scale, as I said, I felt that in order to really get any kind of something special going, I felt that I had to be out of scale. And I equally enjoy working large and small. And this was one of, I began to do on my regular commissions, which I did a large relief of Joe Hill. I began fascinated with the character and began to just want to do my own, where I didn't really have to satisfy a client. I could just render the person the way I wanted to. And the same goes with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I'd done a couple of reliefs of her, and I became so fascinated and impressed with her that I just wanted to go on and just do some of my own more expressive overscale pieces. And so that led to a whole series that started out just as class demos in my relief, or rather in my portrait class. I would just offer this as a alternative to somebody who just wanted to try a different mode of doing a portrait. So these were just quick, maybe half-hour studies or an hour study in some cases. This was one of Rachel Carson that I did after I learned about her work in Silent Spring. And sometimes the overscale could be in a foam enlargement, which was, again, enabled me to work at use tools in a different way, and determine my ability to leave things unstated in some cases or highlight others. And the one that's coming up next is one certainly where I had very different expectations, and that was one year in LA, the Gibson Guitar Company decided to have a show of their guitars on Sunset Boulevard, and they commissioned, oh, I think it was probably about 15 artists to do their version of any artist that they wanted on their list who used Gibson guitars. And I'd always had a crush on Debbie Harry, so I decided I would do her. Most artists, I think, for that project chose to paint their guitars, but I think they were basically painters and illustrators, and so I decided to do mine in relief. But the only stipulation was that it had to be up for a year outdoors, and so I had to come up with a way to weatherproof it. And so what I chose to do was make it first out of cardboard, and this board is actually it's called Ram board. It comes in rolls at Home Depot, and you can just put it on your floor if you're remodeling to keep your floor from being damaged. But it makes kind of an interesting sculpture material. And then I went over it with Bondo to weatherproof it and painted it. And it was kind of a breakthrough for me because I really hadn't done anything in that material before. And just seeing what the material did was thrilling to me because it was fast. Speaking of fast, back in the 90s, mid 90s, I had the good fortune to get a run on religious pieces, and I had about 15 over life-size pieces that had to be done. And I knew that I really couldn't doing it the traditional mode would have been very time-consuming and sluggish. And so, since I was filling my oats with ceramic clay, with wet clay, I decided if I could do this with slabs, it would get me there a lot faster. And since I didn't really have to worry about likenesses, nobody's going to argue with what St. James or Andrew looked like. I could get away with a lot on that area. So I just got a slab roller and I started to make big slabs and throw them on a piece of plywood. And sure enough, I was able to quickly arrange them in a way that it made the construction of these figures go pretty fast. And it was thrilling to me too, because it gave me a simpler, more streamlined kind of look than the fussiness if I would have chosen to render folds from scratch. And also, it made the portraits go a lot quicker too. Okay. Whoops. I'm sorry, I'll go back. I must have hit one thing too hard. Try to go back. Okay. Okay, this is where I was. I'm sorry. I'm having a little trouble advancing my slides. Okay. Susan Storer was a ceramic, well, I shouldn't say ceramic artist, but she was a sculptor.
Eugene, I'm sorry to butt in, but Suzanne is actually watching.
Oh, okay. Well, great. Susan, thank you. I'm confusing. Anyway, I came upon Susan's work several years ago, and we featured her in the Sculpture Review. And I was just so impressed with her ability to come up with a sculptural mode and impose her drawing skills on that, and to create this sort of symbiotic combination that just works so well. And I think, in my opinion, enabled her to work beyond herself. This was the one that was on the cover. And again, it's a matter of just sculpting so much and then knowing when to stop, and then rendering the rest as a draftsman would. And it makes for a wonderful combination. I haven't seen anybody do that kind of work since Rudy Audio was imposing images on his large figurative pieces. And this is a relief. And again, she has a tremendous knowledge, I think, of glazes as well. That again is one more thing that takes it over the top. My next example is Beth Cavener, and I came upon her work first back many years ago. I guess it was right after she had done a stay at the Archie Bray Foundation, and I actually bought one of her little pieces, and it was very different than this. And so it's been fun watching her just become a rock star, I think, in the sculpture world. And she's been in all the interesting magazines, and she's just found an amazing technique that I think takes her way beyond herself. And it has a lot to do, I think, with process, because even though she's doing these in wet clay and ceramic clay, she uses a totally different, she uses armatures, and she has a whole different approach than either one or the other. This next artist, Patricia Piccinini, I think the first two slides that I show you, you may not recognize her, but she does these sort of anthropomorphic subjects. And this is called Sky Whale. And I think you'll, this one is called the Stags, dueling motor scooters. And everything she does, whether it's inflatable or plastic or whatever it is just done with such amazing skill. And I think you'll recognize this last piece because she's done quite a few pieces in this mode, this sort of hyper figurative mode. And the next category for me is a very important one, because it is maybe even more than sculpture in the round allowed me to make some major breakthroughs. And back in the early 80s, the contemporary art medal really didn't exist until John Cook, who was really the godfather of the whole movement in the American Medallic Sculpture Association, which formed about a year later. John took the medal, and I think I'm not sure where he found out about it, but there's a group in Europe who have been working away for years doing these amazing contemporary medals, but the Americans didn't know about it. So he introduced us to it, and it really changed things quite a bit. And fortunately, I was one of the early members of AMSA, so I've seen the world, the medallic world, really change in America, and in a very exciting way. We've gotten beyond just the conventional traditional medals. And early in the 90s, right after I moved to California, I took a jewelry class. It was just a 2-day course by, I believe her name was Susan Kingsley, and she was demonstrating with a 20-ton truck jack how she could press and force metal into different shapes, mainly for bracelets and things like that. But immediately I saw a way to do metals, and I started to think about, well, metals are pressed in a maybe 200,000 pound press. I don't know, they're huge tonnage, but they have to have the whole preparation of making a clay and a plaster, and then reduction, and then a die, and it costs thousands and thousands of dollars. And so for people who are wanting to do art metals and experiment, you need to be able to have control of that. And so this truck jack allowed me to take a piece of lucite, and I carved a negative image into it. And the image was a head, just a man's head. And then I would take various soft metals and lay them into my mold. And then I would put them in the truck jack and put a piece of foam or hard rubber in between. And it would, as I jacked the pressure up, it would force the rubber, which pressed the metals into the mold. And so Sometimes I would just lay one metal in at a time. Sometimes I'd take it out, I'd put another metal, put it back in again. And so this metal is a combination of lead and copper and aluminum and whatever that stuff is that's wrapped around wine bottles in the top. That's what that top piece is. And then I just kept trying using the same mold, laying different materials into the mold. And this one was ceramic clay with, and then a secondary press of a piece of aluminum was put in. And I used a lot of aluminum in those days. I think it was aluminum. Basically, they were old printer plates, and they were free and cheap. And so I was not worried about making errors. And of course, there were many errors. And some of the errors actually were breakthroughs, and sometimes figuratively breakthroughs, like around this forehead here. That metal actually broke from the pressure, and I was able to slide a photograph behind it, and then just some press type. And this final one was just paper pulp that I just pushed into the mold. I didn't need a press for that. And then I mounted it on a piece of blue plastic that I'd found in the thrift store or something. This next metal is just a recent one. And again, looking for a speedy way to record ideas, because I have so many ideas that I realize I'll never have time to do. So I thought, well, when the Floyd riots were going on and the Black Lives Matter protesters, and I really related to it. I just wanted to do something. And so I went into the studio and I just took a piece of cardboard and started ripping it up and cutting it. And I came up with this little protester, which is about 6 inches tall. And it took all of about 4 hours, I guess, including painting to do it. But it allowed me to, at least record my ideas. And this one was the same kind of thing. It was about a 4-hour medal. I realized I was late for the entry in a show. And so I very quickly went back to my old printer plates and used a repoussé technique where you're pressing from the back of the metal. And so I just sharpened some wooden sticks and used them for stylus. And I just press in the metal from behind, and it pushes it up and it stretches it. And this is kind of an unforgiving thing because there's no way you can correct. But on a good day, your marks will not be superfluous. And again, another 4-hour medal. And the next are a few medals by Magdalena Dobrucka, who has always been one of my favorite European medalists. And she has come up with a way that I think she works beyond herself through her technique. And I honestly don't know how she does it, but she has this amazing way of rendering highly stylized forms, but always maintaining an organic component to the composition. And it's just delightful to my eyes, at least. And I think this one may be in plaster or porcelain. And the next one is another medalist, Jim Licaretz, who worked at the US Mint for several years. And Jim is an amazing figure modeling sculptor, and he has found ways he's been working on his computer a lot lately, and he's done such an interesting job of taking I like to use the word cannibalizing, because he takes some of his really beautiful early pieces and scans them, puts them into the computer, and then comes back and manipulates them in the computer. He can do step and repeat. He can distort them. He can do all manner of things in the computer. And then he has a complete knowledge of producing them also in different ways. He's got a 3D printer. He'll sometimes use that. Other times he'll use a CNC machine to mill them. Then he'll make molds, and he'll use different materials. And in this case, he's using plexiglass or lucite, some clear resin type of material, and just getting some really wonderful and interesting results. And so I think Jim has really found a way to work beyond himself. Now, these next, I think 2 or 3 artists are just, I don't know if they know that I'm such a fan, but I've never met this man, Gwiazda. I hope I'm not pronouncing his name wrong, but I think he's an absolute genius. And he embraces every bit of his facility. He doesn't deny a bit of it, and yet he has this amazing painterly way, and he uses clay the way painters talk about lost and found edges, and then he composes it and comes up with these unique compositions and unexpected poses that are just thrilling. And he's also a master at surface coloration and patina. And this last piece of his is, I believe it looks to me like a slab built piece by the look of it. And the next one is our own Simon Kogan. And there is no better example of, I think, an artist that works beyond himself more than Simon. And he does it on a regular basis. And when I saw this Bukowski, which I've recently done a Bukowski, and I was just so jealous when I saw it, because he's just achieved such an amazing power with this piece. Even if it was only 2 inches tall, and I don't know how tall it is, it has a monumental feel to it. And it's so evocative. I kidded him and said that even the bones in the skull seem to evoke emotion. And it's kind of hard to tell how Simon works. I've seen videos of him working, and sometimes he uses his hands and sometimes he uses a 2x4, but always ends up with a powerful, evocative piece. I love this piece, and also never afraid to change mediums and stop modeling and start carving. But I love this piece for many reasons. One is the use of the trunk as a torso, which so beautifully complements the head, and just that wonderful touch of red paint. If he would have taken away another splinter, it would have ruined it. So he knew just when to stop. And this delightful little composition here with a slab, I think it's a couple. I don't know much about it, but it's so expressive and delightful. Scott Fife is another artist I've followed for many years, and I love his Frankensteinian look to his subjects. I think if he were to do this just in clay, it wouldn't have nearly the power that it has by him showing us his technique. And this is a recent piece that I just did in one of my first efforts in corrugated cardboard. And I don't think I've really worked beyond myself yet, but I feel like I'm getting close to it anyway. And then the next piece I'm going to show you is another way, I think, to work beyond yourself is to join up with somebody who's really talented and can work with you and have that experience where 2 and 2 make 6. And so Michael and I worked, we've done several public projects together, and he's an awesome contemporary artist, very different than me, very minimal, highly sophisticated, minimalist. And yet together, I think both of us push each other and allow each other to grow and collaborate and come up with interesting combinations. This was basically depicting the history of Lincoln Park and Burbank and these things. Amelia Earhart, for example, flew out of Burbank. And sorry, forgot to turn my phone off. And the other hat below represents the workers who built the town, the people who worked in the fields and the orchards, the vineyards, and the people who labored under the sun. And of course, Lincoln Park, the Lincoln top hat represented the namesake. And so Michael and I have had a good time doing these projects together. And last, I wanted to include my wife, who just started a show and also just began working in cardboard this last year, and just opened a show in LA on the 12th. And these pieces are very different for her. She was a painter mainly with a fashion background, but she's jumped into the cardboard world, and this series is based on the 7 Deadly Sins and the Wizard of Oz. And she's simply used lath screws to put this together and gotten some very dramatic effects. They're quite large and colorful, and I'm very proud of her. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Eugene.
Welcome.
We've had a lot of comments while you were talking, and some questions that came through directly. Do you have a favorite media that you work in?
Yeah, let's see. You know, for different projects, it's kind of interesting, because I think probably of all my commission work, probably 90% of it's done with oil clay, and I don't think I have showed one piece in oil clay today, because oil clay, as wonderful as it is for so many things, it doesn't seem to allow me to go beyond myself. I can only work up to myself with it, and so I love the ceramic clay. But I'm finding that I'm loving fabricating, and so we'll see where that leads.
Gwen, you gotta unmute yourself.
Thank you. I'm talking into a wall. You showed some of Anne's work. I know that you two have collaborated on at least a couple of projects. Is that something that you do regularly, or was that just sort of a one-off, or once or twice?
We have collaborated, not regularly, but over the years, we have collaborated on several. In fact, the Henry Herring Award was something that we worked on together, that project for Santa Fe Springs. And that we're currently working on one for the metro system in LA, and mainly on public commissions we work together.
Okay, thank you. So Wesley is asking, do you have an image of the RBG from the side?
A view of
the Ruth Bader Ginsburg portrait.
I don't. No, I don't have a picture from the side.
So we'll get that to you soon, Wesley. I'd be happy to fly out there and photograph it with my phone.
You know what I do, Gwen, is usually with most of my pieces, and I don't know how many of you can relate to this, but I love to take the shot of its best angle. And every piece of sculpture has a best angle.
Good point.
When you were talking about you changed to doing slab rolled reliefs, what's the difference between like a relief and a slab, you know, using slabs in your relief? Like what do you do differently exactly?
Well, if you're working on a small relief, for instance, like for a medal, you're only dealing with about maybe an eighth to a quarter of an inch of clay. So just by nature, it has to be solid, you know, working at that size. The larger you get, the material, if you have to add a lot of it, it becomes a deficit, because now you've got to pile hundreds of pounds of clay onto the surface and then move all that material around. So at some point, it becomes a real advantage to work with a hollow material or a slab where you can reach your hand under it and push up, so you don't have to have the weight of all that clay.
Mm. Okay. I thought
Plus, it
maybe
gives
you
you a
were
totally
like,
different, it gives you a totally different look also.
yeah, I thought maybe you were like die cutting pieces out of slab and putting them on top of slab, like building slabs up.
No, no. Sometimes
Okay.
what I will do though is when I'm preparing a relief, and I'm actually doing one right now that's about 3 foot by 4 foot, I will cut sections of styrofoam for intermediate layers. Again, so that I don't have to use so much material, because on this I'll be using oil clay, and so I can get it down to maybe instead of 150 pounds of clay, I can get it down to 25 or less.
Great.
So, may I,
Ira.
hi. Hmm.
Who is talking?
Elizabeth. This
Hi.
is Suzanne Storr.
Hi. Go ahead, Suzanne.
All right. I'm honored, Eugene, that you would show my work. And you had some of my favorite all-time artists there, including the gentleman with the large, from Berkeley, with the large clay. And you seem to have kept yourself totally open to surfaces, to materials, to whatever, whatever excites you now. And as I grow older, like I'm narrowing down to what I know will work for me. So, I don't know how to deal with it other than to keep going. So, but anyway, your work is just marvelous.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, speed to me as well. I realize that I'll never be able to realize all the ideas. And so I'm gravitating toward pieces that I can do quickly. And so speed becomes very important to me at this point in my life.
Right.
Thanks, Suzanne. So Patty asked, do you find working in the various other media less expensive than in sort of traditional media?
Absolutely, because if you're working in oil clay, you're going to have to do something with it. You're going to have to cast it in something. You're going to have to make a mold. You're going to have to make a wax. You're going to have to make a bronze, and all of that is expensive, especially as the size creeps up. It becomes wildly expensive. And so the use of other materials is very inviting to me, because now if I do something in ceramic clay, all I have to do is fire it. And maybe that cost me $40. It's a big difference. And if it's cardboard, even less.
And they're beautiful. So Wesley, do you want to unmute and ask your question? I think we'll take a leap of faith here. I think it'll work.
Well, if his doesn't, I've got a question. This is Tuck.
Okay, go ahead.
Gene, can you talk to us a little bit about your feelings concerning permanence in sculpture? I noticed you switch back and forth between things like bronze for outside and then cardboard and paper. Talk to us about your feeling about the importance of permanence.
I do think about it, but for me, it's kind of always a trade-off. And for a lot of the things that I do, for instance, metals, it's simply not important. They're going to be around and they'll be inside, they'll be protected. Ceramic is pretty safe outside. I would love to be able to have everything in bronze, but it would just be too expensive. And honestly, to me, bronze becomes boring after a while. There's only so much you can do with patinas, and I've never been great at patinas, and I struggle with them. And with clay, if a glaze doesn't work, I can always paint it. And I love being able to use paper. I mean, really cardboard falls into the paper category, and galleries really take paper pretty seriously. They'll laugh at plaster, but for some reason the paper is considered very archival. I'll give you that cardboard isn't very archival, and just like all the early abstract expressionists like Rauschenberg, a lot of the work is in trouble now because it's beginning to disintegrate, and that is an issue that I'll have to deal with if I continue to do cardboard work, because I have to be realistic about that. It's not going to last forever.
Thanks. And Wesley is asking, with the religious figures, did you sketch the shape of the figure prior to the slab drapery, the form underneath the drapery?
I did do sketches of them all, but then when it came time to really do the final work, I just projected up a profile and I took it from there, because I didn't want to have to, again, think about following something too tightly. And it would have been difficult because I don't know how I would have done it really.
Okay, and Jacqueline is asking, what are you working on now?
Well, I'm working on a bunch of little projects, actually, with the exception of one large relief, and actually one public art commission that I'm working on with my wife Ann for the metro station in LA, and that's going to grace the platform of the train platform and a few of the parts of it. And so that's kind of an interesting project, and but mostly portraits and some medals.
Thanks. And Charlotte is asking, how do you cut styrofoam without making a mess?
That's impossible. I do make a mess. I make a huge mess. But not only, I wouldn't confine that to styrofoam. I make a huge mess in anything that I'm doing. Wax, oh my God. Wax makes a terrible mess. Plaster makes a terrible mess. Paint makes a mess. My studio is a disaster.
And I'm going to ask Judy Solinsky, do you want to unmute yourself and ask Eugene your question?
Hi, Eugene.
Hi, Judy.
Okay, my question is, have you worked in aqua resin or any type of resin? And if so, what have you used to attach two pieces together, like a tree with branches, so the branches stay on the main body of the tree? Is there a type of putty, or do you screw the pieces together and then put the putty over it?
Well, without seeing the piece, I'm not sure, but I'm going to take a guess. First of all, I have not worked with aqua resin. I'm very curious about it. I saw it being demonstrated at the Complete Sculpture at one of our shows, and I was mesmerized by it. But then I never got back to trying it. I'd love to try it. But as far as adding a piece, and I think what you're talking about is maybe adding some delicate pieces to an existing piece of that material, and that could be accomplished with in a couple ways. One would be to use this two-part sculpting epoxy, where you can squeeze it together, and then you can model pieces and attach it, and I think it will adhere to that, and then you could continue to model it until you get it just right, and again attach it to the piece. And then when it dries, no matter how delicate it is super strong.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Be sure to hold the metal out. Tirar la metal. Okay.
So we have some general questions. Here's a specific question from Robert. Do you prefer a specific kind of water-based clay? Do you have a favorite?
You know, that's a really good question. And in my years working with ceramic clay, I keep going back and forth, and that's the beauty of it. You know, when you're doing a portrait, you really want something fine that has a lot of plasticity to it and can really move beautifully. And when I switch over to these hollow heads, I want the exact opposite of that. I want something that has a ton of grog in it so that it'll support itself, and it has very little plasticity to it, but it has strength. And there are so many different kinds of clay. So I'm working on a metal right now, and I'm casting some of them. It's a Bukowski metal, and I've had some of them made in bronze, and now I'm making them in porcelain. And I've tried press molding them. I've tried pouring them in porcelain, and I'm finding that porcelain is just an amazing material because it's so sensuous and subtle after it's fired, and so beautifully smooth, and I'm loving. So I'm all over the place on various kinds of clays for various applications and uses and sizes as well.
Thank you. And Karina, did you want to ask your question, unmute and ask your question?
I'd love to. Thank you so.
So Karina's question is about composition, your composition approach for large scale reliefs. How do you attack them?
So sorry about that. I'm dog sitting, and so it's very
That's okay.
exciting.
We just asked your question, so you can.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I just wanted to say, Eugene, it's so great to see you. I had the honor of studying with you relief and portrait in San Francisco. So this is so much fun just to see your face and to see your work, and it's just an honor. Yeah, and I'm starting to get into reliefs, and so I remember your giant panels and just your brilliance, and going to Japantown specifically I would always walk in a way to see your work. And, you know, I'll be at an airport and I'll see your work. And so I always wanted to ask you this question about what's your thinking about approaching telling a story in a large relief?
Well, you know, depending on how much room you have, you know, if you're doing something for a small 3-inch metal, you're going to have to do a lot of abbreviation and make that story pretty limited. Where if you have the luxury of 18 feet over a distance, you could get a lot of information in that. And so, you know, basically that large, I think the one you're talking about is for in the Capitol in Montana. I did always drawings first, plotting it out in sketches, and then converting that into, I believe I did a 30-inch maquette of that. And then from that 30-inch maquette, I had Bill Chrysler scan it and enlarge it up to, I think it was 18 feet. And so that's a tremendous, I don't know what that percentage scale is in enlargement, but it's way higher than is normal. And it worked out pretty well. And I think once it's up in foam at that size, and then you can really go back in and fine tune it again. But yeah, when you're working, I find that really for large reliefs, I really always have to really plot that out very carefully, so I know it's going to happen, because it's going to be big, and I don't want to have to be making large changes at that size.
And so in terms of like how much clay you add to the foam, do you have like a rule of thumb to always add a little more than less?
As little as I can get away with. And on that, if you've seen that photograph of that panel on the website, what you're looking at is about 99% foam with probably a handful of clay over that 18 feet. So very, very little clay.
That's amazing, and it really speaks to the value of preparation.
Yeah, the foam is an amazing material. You're really able to carve it, and I think you find when you're carving it, you enjoy that process as much as you do the modeling. And then what I do is I simply, after I've carved it, I get paint. I go to Home Depot and get a can of paint mixed up the same color as my Chavant clay, and then I coat it with that a couple of times, and then I can add a little pinch of clay here and there to add a little bit here and there where I want, or to fill a hole or something, and you don't see it, so it all visually looks the same, but it's very little clay.
And what's your favorite foam to carve?
Well, when you're doing enlarging, you don't have too many choices. It comes in different weights, and I think the weight that I use is 4 pound. And if you go any softer than that, it's going to be like floral foam, and it's simply too soft. And if you go any harder than that, like 8 pound and 10 pound, it's so hard that you can no longer, you need a chisel to carve it. So the 4 pound is, to me, the perfect balance there.
Thank you so much, Eugene. So great to see you.
So, Eugene, we have a few more questions, but I think some of them you've answered through answering some of the others. But one from Jackie Lorio: how do you handle lettering in metals? Do you do your own lettering, or?
I always do my own lettering in almost every metal. And I love that because I'm very fussy about the lettering, and I've always had a love of type forms. I think because I started out in graphics and I fell in love with typography and letter forms. And so it's very critical, the choice of a typeface to fit the subject matter, and also the subtlety of it on the metal. It can't overpower. And to me, the institutional letters that the Mint can give you, or you can even have them duplicated so you can stick them on, but they always have this kind of an institutional industrial look to them. They have no subtlety or grace. They don't really feel like they belong to the metal. They feel like they're stuck on. And so I like to carve all my lettering in reverse. And that way I can control the height of it. I can control the spacing of it. And yeah, so I love that.
Then here's a very different question. Heather's asking if you have any advice for an artist or someone who's just starting to do some public sculpture, public artwork.
Oh, well, boy,
that's wide open.
my first answer would be a glib one, is to be careful what you're good at, because I think in my case, I started public sculpture because I needed to make a regular income, and it took over my life to the point where I think it did a lot of damage to me, and I wasn't able to do, or I shouldn't say I wasn't able, but I chose not to devote as much time as I should have to personal work.
And let's see, can you talk, this is from Phoebe. Can you talk about the importance of the positive to negative plaster process in making metals?
It's the most important thing I tell students, at classes, that the use of knowing how to work in the negative is one of the most valuable things you can know as a sculptor, because it allows you to do so much and control the surface and control everything, and enhance it to a point that it would be insane to try to do in the positive. So working in the negative is a hugely important, allows you to do a lot of pushing of volumes, for one thing, indication of fine filigree type of work that would be impossible to do. Lettering, for example, which would simply be way too small to try to model. So things that are way too small to model are quite easy to do in reverse when you're carving them in plaster, because you have the resistance of a firmer material, and allows you to really finesse fine things.
Thanks. And Cheryl is asking, what cone do you fire to? Do you get cracks in your porcelain after firing?
Since I am so, I'm not good at firing. I've had a big kiln for probably 25 years. And I've never fired it because I'm terrified of it. I'm afraid I'm going to burn the house down or have ceramic pizza. And so I've just decided that I'm going to just take everything to the clay studio in my neighborhood, and they fire for me. The only limitation with that is that they don't fire mid-range. They only do high fire and low fire, and so then you have to, unless you're going to paint your pieces, have to accommodate yourself to glazes that work, and also to clay bodies that will be high fire or low fire. So right now I'm not doing any mid-range work. I'm doing just high and low, but that's okay, because in the studio that I'm using, they do reduction firing, which is I think much more interesting, produces more interesting kind of surface quality and glazes and a look than the electric firing.
Thank you. And finally, before you lose your voice, one more question. Paula is asking what type of tool you use to carve the styrofoam.
Oh, the styrofoam, I use the same tools that I use for modeling. I use a rake tool. Sometimes I'll get a little piece of plastic and I'll put notches in it, and I'll use that as a rake tool for especially in very large pieces, so I get the same effect that I got on the small piece when I use a small rake. Now I need a big rake to produce the same kind of marks. And so yeah, I use the same tool. I even would, because 4-pound foam is so easy to carve. I mean, I could even use my thumbnail to do detail work if I wanted to. So
Okay, I lied. We have one more question. Gwen is asking, what kind of paint do you use? You mentioned you go to Home Depot and pick up paint.
Yeah, the cheapest, either, usually I like it to get a satin, satin or matte, either one. You don't want a glossy.
Yeah, this is on the clay work, right?
Yeah, and I just get a cheap house paint. Yeah, cheap house paint in satin or flat. And they have that technique where if you give them a little piece of clay or a color, they can match it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I'm cutting everyone off.
Thank you all.
This has been wonderful. I could watch that presentation all over again. I loved every image you projected.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eugene.
My pleasure.
Really. And I mean, it's always an honor to see you and hear from you and learn from you. And also thank you so much to everyone who attended tonight. Really appreciate it. Please check your emails and our website for future programs. We've got a lineup and we'll continue to have a minimum of 2 a month.